Sir Robert Gordon Menzies passed away on the 15th of May, 1978. He was 83. Robert Menzies was the 12th and longest-serving Prime Minister of Australia, holding office from 1939 to 1941, and again from 1949 to 1966. The rare following 1955 interview footage you're about to see was filmed with Radio 2 UE's Stuart Lamb in 1955. It has an ominous message for us today when we're being asked to vote for the race-based voice. In the 1955 interview, Robert Menzies was asked about the White Australia policy. This was a race-based policy mainly favouring European Caucasians as Australian migrants. These migrants were primarily British, Irish, Italian, Greek, Polish, Ukrainian, Dutch and Northern Europeans. They were favoured for their shared European history, cultures and Christian values, which support the rule of law in Australia. These new Australian arrivals would quickly fit in. This interview has lessons for today as the Voice referendum is being thrust on an unwilling Australia to constitutionally change the nation using race. Watch the interview and I'll be back.
I believe that the so-called White Australia policy will always be a stumbling block?
I don't think it's such a stumbling block as people pretend, but that it's important for us, I haven't the slightest doubt.
That we should maintain it the way it is?
So long as we possibly can, we ought to aim at having a homogeneous population. I don't want to see reproduced in Australia the kind of problem they have in South Africa, or in America, or increasingly in Great Britain. I think it's been a very good policy, and it's been of great value to us. And most of the criticism of it that I've ever heard doesn't come from these Oriental countries. It comes from wandering Australians.
For these views, of course, in the past, Sir Robert, you have been described as a racist.
Have I?
I have read this, yes.
Well, if I were not described as a racist, I'd be the only public man who hasn't been. That's one of these jargons, isn't it? One of these mod words. You call a man a racist.
Menzies was a defender of the White Australia policy, which his deputy, Harold Holt, as Prime Minister after Menzies, would dismantle by opening Australia to a flood of non-white migration. The Holt government's Migration Act of 1966 was the beginning of the end for a unified, homogeneous Australia. It's accelerated to today, where the majority white population no longer recognises the nation they grew up in and which their forebears built and bequeathed and entrusted to them. Holt weaponised race to change Australia from a homogeneous nation of shared values to the current disparate mix of isolated races which can never integrate because of colour and retained cultural practices and values not consistent with the white Australian majority. Miscegenation or race mixing has never worked in human history, particularly where a race makes itself extinct. Menzies was correct. Mixed races are the seeds of discontent, irrespective of the good intentions of peoples to live together. In the end, genetic and demographics remind people of who they really are. Multiculturalism is a failure, as Europe is witnessing. That's where Australia is heading. The artificial construct of the state can't overcome the reality of race, no matter how many generations pass or how much race shame is hurled at those who want to continue and protect their genetic heritage, history and way of life. Menzies was correct. Race shaming is a political trick. It's being used today with the Voice to shut down questions and opposition. America has seen perpetual racial problems with its Negroes. It's a problem that will never go away. Sub-Saharan black Africans, Chinese and Indians have served to dilute and divide Australia, which is heading towards white replacement, as is happening in Britain, Ireland, Europe and America, if the ever-escalating non-white immigration continues unabated. We're badgered with endless dubious climate change policies, yet the population is pushed for ever-increasing numbers to fuel economic growth that isn't real. Only growth from productivity is real. The rest is like the Voice smoke and mirrors that doesn't improve the standard of living or quality of life. Just ask any renter who must contend with the immigration-fueled housing crisis. The division of Australia into tribes is relentless, designed to divide and conquer for more control over our lives. The current Australian government wants to accelerate it with the Voice referendum, that few, if any, Australians understand. What they do understand, it's being sold like a hyped supermarket or clothing brand, except the Voice is going to bring division and trouble with no faulty product recall once the Constitution is changed by the Voice and we find out what it was really about. It's a Trojan horse. If the Voice was genuine, it wouldn't need bought-off sporting organisations and celebrities to spruik it. If we don't know the details, how do paid footballers, singers, actors, or the usual bevy of biased ABC journalists? We need facts, and they've given us spin. Most Australians are begrudgingly tolerant of non-white economic immigrants. Australians usually go along to get along. They're laid-back people, but they don't take kindly to being fooled, which the voice marketing seeks to do. Most Australians have goodwill towards Aboriginal people. They give the 750,000 Australian Aboriginal population over $40 billion annually in taxpayers' money. That's $53,000 spent on each Aboriginal over and above other Australians. That's more than the pay the rent shamers cry about. With the proposed voice brand name referendum, which lacks detail, expect the 53,000 to grow exponentially into hundreds of thousands of dollars per Aboriginal, which they won't get, just as they don't get the current 53,000, which is skimmed off by parasitic advisors and the white-run Aboriginal industry, and a gaggle of proven to be corrupt elite half-caste Aboriginals, which is why the failed Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission was disbanded. No Australian wants to see Aboriginals suffer in remote communities. Aussies want Indigenous suffering to end and not some voice in the corrupt footsteps of another ATSIC like bureaucracy and a repeat of the paternalistic stolen generations, which is an eternal shame on the nation. No wonder the voice proponents don't want to discuss it in detail. Just vote for the brand, they say, and if you don't, you're racist. Menzies suffered marred racist epithets from malicious opponents who today are known as woke. Like Menzies, the voice opponents today are enduring racial slurs from an army of government-paid publicists, media shills, ad agencies, clueless Labor government apparatchiks, pompous academics and self-appointed pseudo-intellectuals, none of which have anything in common with the average working Australian who will be endlessly expected to pay for their voice. A financial cost nobody knows anything about. The voice proponents dare not cost it. Otherwise, the voice will be exposed for what it is. It's power and money that's driving the voice. We must ask who benefits. Millions aren't being spent for pure virtue. We know Aboriginals won't benefit, so who does benefit behind the curtain? Come out of the shadows, Australians are saying. Tell us the truth. If the voice isn't going to change anything for Greater Australia, then why is it needed? And for what and whose benefit is it needed? The failure of transparent voice costing and details is why the voice will fail. Referenda in Australia usually fail. It will be no different with the voice. Australians are wary of political power grabs at their expense. It's why most Australians plan to vote no for a black hole, for a spurious black cause that doesn't exist. In the final analysis, the voice is an emotional race-based blackmail campaign that not even black Aboriginals are buying. They don't want their name misused. Now they're fully integrated into Australia, largely through the work of Robert Menzies. It was a Liberal Party Prime Minister that delivered for Aboriginal people, while the Labor Party has traded in vacuous virtue signalling of trendy urban guilt, hand-wringing and Labor leaders' crocodile tears, which Australians aren't buying. Aboriginals know who've been their true friends. They are aware that in 1949, Robert Menzies legislated to ensure that all Aboriginal ex-servicemen should have the right to vote. In 1961, a Menzies Parliamentary Committee was established to investigate and report to the Parliament on Aboriginal voting rights. And in 1962, Menzies' Commonwealth Electoral Act provided that all Aboriginal Australians should have the right to enrol and vote at federal elections. In 1967, the last vestiges of full Aboriginal integration were approved by referendum by the Australian people. Now the voice referendum wants to undo all the past Menzies spirit of reforms for Australian unification, from a one Australian people to a new Aboriginal bureaucratic overlord class to veto all that happens in Australia. Aboriginals know it won't be them doing the vetoing, yet they'll be blamed for the voice division, attracting community odium they don't currently have, want or seek, and which the voice will attribute to Aboriginals. That's why the film clip you just saw is so important today. It tells us what Menzies thought on race and what he'd think today about the voice. He was in favour of a united homogeneous Australia, and that included Aboriginals, as he proved via his numerous initiatives and lasting actions which the voice wants to undo. We know what Robert Menzies would say about the voice. We can guess after hearing him speak here about the importance of homogeneity as opposed to the contemporary malaise of diversity at all costs. Menzies would not be complimentary about the voice, seeing what he did to bring Aboriginals into the greater